Private investigators, what was the most disturbing case you've gotten? Story 1. My company sometimes does paternity investigations and DNA testing. We had a case where a woman with a newborn baby filed for child support and the man disputed it was his. We tested them all. He wasn't the father. She wasn't the mother. The latter part was surprising, so we reached out to the lawyer since we wanted to rule out a sample error, accidental or otherwise, or medical stuff like surrogate pregnancy or chimerism. We were eventually informed that the mother's medical records contained no evidence she'd ever been pregnant. The creepy part is that no one had any idea where she'd gotten the baby or who the real parents were. Story 2. Not disturbing, but generally creepy. I hired a PI for the work I do. We were trailing a man who we believed was committing fraud. His home address was a burned-out trailer, so we had to find where the guy actually lived. PI follows him one day and ends up in this abandoned industrial site, but loses sight of the subject. Upon further research, the PI discovered that this land is in fact owned by the subject. So he went back, found a discreet spot to set up shop, and began more surveillance. PI is waiting and watching when one day, a clown emerges from one of the buildings on the property, gets in a vehicle and drives away. Apparently, Guy had multiple side hustles, including working as a clown, doing face paint, etc., at local carnivals, all the while living on the property of an old abandoned industrial complex. I remember hearing all this and thinking, what in the Scooby-Doo? Story 3. Not a PI, close friend who told me this story is. He was contacted for a contract offer to find evidence of an estranged man's wife having an affair. Nothing was readily apparent on socials, so he did physical investigation and stalked the wife, found out where she was going. Roughly twice a week, she would go to someone's house and bring her kid too. Did a bit of research on the person that was either the homeowner or renter. It was a guy. He was a convicted felon with charges of supplying minors with adult beverage and had a potential charge of statutory violation dropped. Victim changed there. Story and claim nothing inappropriate happened, but had to enlist on SO registry. PI immediately dropped the case and notified proper authorities about it and husband. Legitimate police did a joint investigation with the FBI and got a search warrant for his home. Turns out the guy wasn't having an affair with the wife, but instead was paying wife to substances, violation, and film her child. Wife got some 30 years, man got life. Answer: convicted felon for supplying minors with adult beverage, and you have to enlist on an intimacy offender registry for charges that are ultimately dropped? What? Edit. If anyone is still reading this and downvoting, fair enough. I'm not defending this alleged scumbag. This story is absolutely abhorrent. I'm just pointing out that it's simply that, a story. Made up bullshit upvoted to the top. A tale as old as time. You don't get felonies for supplying adult beverage to minors, and you don't get on an intimacy offender registry for charges that get dropped. If there are more details, more felony crimes, the SA charges weren't actually dropped, but he took a plea instead, etc., that OP left out, then sure. But as written, it's just some straight-up bullshit. Story 4. When I was in college taking a criminal justice course, the instructor was a former cop who became a PI after getting injured in the line of duty. One of his clients was a family law lawyer who hired him to follow a client's wife they suspected of hiding assets in a divorce proceeding. While he was keeping tabs on the lady, he noticed that there was another guy who was sometimes outside of her job or house at odd hours. Occasionally, he'd take photos of her, and sometimes he'd take photos of the PI. He thought at first that his client had pulled a joke, hire a PI to follow another PI, so he had his Former colleagues at the police department checked the guy's license plate. Turns out he was an employee who got fired by her company for intimacy harassing her, and he started stalking her. The PI never found any hidden assets, and the guy later went to jail for stealing her mail. Story 5. Not a PI, dispatcher. I had a young woman jump into a stranger's car, and the stranger took her to the airport. Security found her and called in and told us where she was. We got a basic rundown of the story from her, basically saying she was running from her boyfriend, who was an intimacy trafficker. A few minutes later, another guy calls saying that he was trying to help a woman escape her boyfriend because the boyfriend was trafficking her. He was gonna put her up in a hotel room, and then she just took off with another man, and he's looking for her because he's worried about her. This is not the guy she jumped in the car with. I'm listening. I'm asking identifying questions. I'm asking him to repeat the story, knowing that officers are already with her, and then he says he's at the airport, and I make sure dispatch knows to get an officer to meet with him immediately, because guess what? He was the trafficker. Edit. Just to give you an ending, trafficker did get arrested. The woman was not returned to him. Story 6. Not a PI anymore, but I used to be. I was lucky to never really face anything too out there. However, there was a case in which a company suspected one if its branch managers was doctoring the books. Things like billing HQ for expenses that didn't exist, like bills for snow plowing when it hadn't snowed in months, phantom employees that didn't actually exist collecting paychecks and not registering cash sales and pocketing the money. One of the investigators, not me, thank God, made the stupid mistake of calling up the manager and telling him to have the books ready for an audit the following day. The manager lit the entire place on fire, including the books, and fled the country. The fire also impacted neighbors and put 2 people in hospital. So now the dude went from potential embezzlement charges to arson. Answer. Reminds me of a guy who was a partial owner and a manager of a bar in northern VA around 2010. He was suspected of shady behavior and tried to burn down the office of the bar Halloween night with tiki torch fluid. Some fun facts. 1. The bar's name was Bridges. Dude literally tried to burn bridges. 2. His costume that night was a prisoner. 3. There were condos above the bar, and he's Arab, so they tried to charge him with terrorism. Fortunately, he wasn't convicted of that, but still got 5 wars. This is what I think of whenever I hear not to burn bridges. Edit. Here's the Fairfax. Underground, link. Heads up, it's got some racist and sexist comments, but it has a lot more details than anything media or DOJ released. DOJ because it was classified as terrorism. WAPO link here. Story 7. Not a PI, but we hired a PI. My adult sister is high functioning and on the autism spectrum. She lived with my parents, and when they were on vacation, they came home to an empty house. She'd moved out and hadn't told them. Nobody knew where she was. She reassured us via text she was okay and had just moved out on her own with some friends. I will admit, even at the time my parents called me hysterical, I was like, it's fine. I'm sure she just found an apartment and wants some space. She was in her late 20s after all. Within 1-2 weeks, she stopped answering calls and texts. On reviewing the home security footage and seeing who picked her up and helped her move out, it was a much older couple that wasn't in her usual friend group. This is when we called the PI to both help us physically find her and understand if she was physically safe. After running plates and doing some Facebook friend investigation, we found the older woman was a co-worker from the national chain restaurant she worked at. My sister and my parents didn't have the best relationship, but my sister lived a comfortable life of privilege in comparison to an average worker, and she vocally complained about my parents at work, which is normal for ASD, and my parents are not exactly easy people. This woman used that as an opportunity and essentially targeted my sister with her husband. Once my sister moved out, this couple took her to the police to file a restraining order on my parents, which hobbled my parents' ability to intervene. To make a long story short, this woman and her husband both financially and physically abused my sister over the course of 6 months. The PI would check on her physical whereabouts and watch as they drained her accounts of cash used to fund their life and parties. They opened a lease in her name. She bought everything from groceries to cigarettes to the home furnishings. They would take her to house parties where they stayed overnight. We only got my sister back because the PI was able to establish a pattern of common public places, and, to my mom's credit, she was able to safely and physically intervene when my sister was in a rare alone moment. We eventually secured a court-ordered restraining order on the man, but couldn't do much given that her accounts were drained as a consenting adult. In good news, 10 years later, she's happily married and living with her childhood sweetheart. Story 8. We had a case years ago where two best friends ran a bar in a border town. One guy was a hard-working professional business person. The other was not, and was running substances through the bar for the substances cartel. The good guy discovered what his friend was up to and confronted him. Next thing you know, good guy was found dead on his balcony with a gun in his hand, but the scene appeared staged to look like a tragic end. The good guy's mom knew it wasn't a tragic end and begged us to help her prove it. We sent a PI down there to do some digging, but my boss started receiving calls on his personal cell, warning us to back off. We could not jeopardize the safety of our investigator, so we turned everything we had over to the police and withdrew from the case. I felt so bad for his mom. He was her only child. Story 9. I had a job as a PI for a short stint where I worked for a company that had me investigating their employees. This was mostly to determine if the employee was fraudulently using workman's comp claims, sick leave, or bereavement leave. 9 times out of 10, there was no fraud at all. But because the company so desperately wanted to fire them anyway, I started letting that 10th one slide. That the bosses didn't trust their employees so much, they had someone investigating them, made all the cases disturbing. I didn't last very long in that job. Story 10. Not a PI, but more adjacent to it. A couple years ago, I investigated a person who was posting high-heeled footcat crush videos on Instagram, which subsequently went viral, I think, because of how terrible it was. I did this with a team of people from around the world, and we found a direct connection to a certain South American YouTuber who went viral in 2018 for 2 separate videos of him abusing cats. One where he physically abused his cat that later died, and another where he threw his new kittens after that passing in a dirty toilet bowl. There were also connections to a bunch of other smaller-time animal abusers in South America. We did find the IP of the person who uploaded the videos amongst other information. But I've switched to other projects because the videos were so bad and unpleasant to watch. Story 11. Got hired by a woman who thought her husband was cheating. I followed him for a few days, but instead of meeting someone, he kept going to this abandoned house in the woods every other night. One night after he left, I checked it out. Inside were old toys, kids' clothes, candles, and tons of photos of children from decades ago. Super disturbing stuff. I reported it. Turns out, he was linked to some cult activity from years back, and that house had a dark history. I just told the wife, "Hez not cheating, but you should definitely leave him." Story 12. I've had a PI license in several states for many years. This is a loaded question because define disturbing. Here we go. A woman was trying to find out if her husband was molesting their little kid, a toddler. We weren't working at the pace she thought we should. So she hid cameras in his office and purposely left the kid with him one weekend to see if he molested her. She went out of town. Too many cheater cases to count. All stupid. If you feel they're cheating, they're probably doing it. And there's much easier ways to find out than hiring us. One wife hired us every other month. We turned over the evidence. She'd cry and cry that she was leaving him. Until next month, I am good at interviewing intimacy offenders and victims. I worked a family case where every person in the family had been molested by a parent, had their child by a molester, and was now dating a molester. Almost like they purposely sought out a so to be with. A case where, after the restaurant closed for the night, the male adult manager gave the employees free booze. This included a few teen girls. Ended up, he and the male employees had the teen girls do a wet t-shirt contest, and then they gang violation one of the girls on a restaurant table where people sat and ate. A double takedown and robbery in a restaurant. Cameras everywhere, so I sat and watched two people die. 1 minute they're working making food. 10 minutes later, they're lying dead on the floor. The girlfriend of one of the perpetrators told us, very seriously, her boyfriend did it because she stopped having intimacy with him. It's happened before. Every time I stopped having intimacy with a guy, he does something crazy. The guy before this one had also shot someone after she'd stopped putting out. One woman we set surveillance on was a stay-at-home mom. Each kid had a daytime nanny and a nighttime nanny, so she had 4 nannies. She didn't work. She went to the club, shopped, and stayed at home. A slew of others. People are strange. Story 13. Not a PI, but I've worked with them on a regular basis. A guy in Florida was reaching out to young, 18-25 Muslim girls and offering them the opportunity to make huge amounts of money by working in adult content. More money than they could get anywhere else doing practically anything, because he never actually paid any of them. Instead, he would get copies of their IDs and have them send in a few private pictures photos in erotic poses. And then he would use the IDs to find their parents and threaten to send the photos to their parents unless the girls gave him basically everything they owned. What was truly disturbing is that we found the guy. We had feds involved. We had multiple victims. But every single one of them refused to cooperate, even if they had approached us first and just went ahead and sent him everything they had. Sending those pictures would have not only caused them shame for the rest of their life, but would have condemned their parents, particularly their mothers, just for having seen the pictures. And this guy knew that, and because of that, was able to just keep doing it. The dude literally was running the extortion ring through a state-registered LLC. Story 14. With most homicides, you can kind of do the math. Money, power, betrayal, humiliation. But torture is always so bonkers. I saw a kid a couple years ago where mom put wires under her kid's fingernails. Like, WTF. Torture is so extra. Those cases sit with me a while. Story 15. I have heard of a mother getting into a lot of problems because she had a very rare condition where 2 eggs merge into one baby, causing her to have 2 different sets of DNA. And then, when a maternity test happened, they found her not to be the mother of her own child because of it. Story 16. Convicted felon for supplying minors with adult beverage? And you have to enlist on an intimacy offender registry for charges that are ultimately dropped? What? Edit. If anyone is still reading this and downvoting, fair enough. I'm not defending this alleged scumbag. This story is absolutely abhorrent. I'm just pointing out that it's simply that, a story. Made up bullshit upvoted to the top, a tale as old as time. You don't get felonies for supplying adult beverage to minors, and you don't get on an intimacy offender registry for charges that get dropped. If there are more details, more felony crimes, the SA charges weren't actually dropped, but he took a plea instead, etc. That OP left out, then sure. But as written, it's just some straight-up bullshit. Story 17 reminds me of a guy who was a partial owner and a manager of a bar in northern VA around 2010. He was suspected of shady behavior and tried to burn down the office of the bar Halloween night with tiki torch fluid. Some fun facts. 1. The bar's name was Bridges. Dude literally tried to burn bridges. 2. His costume that night was a prisoner. 3. There were condos above the bar, and he's Arab, so they tried to charge him with terrorism. Fortunately, he wasn't convicted of that but still got 5 YRs. This is what I think of whenever I hear not to burn bridges. Edit. Here's the Fairfax. Underground. Link. Heads up, it's got some racist and sexist comments, but it has a lot more details than anything media or DOJ released. DOJ because it was classified as terrorism. WAPO link. Here. Story 18. I can watch humans destroy themselves in all manner of ways with zero affect, but I can't stomach animal cruelty. They are always innocent and never deserve the treatment they're getting. It makes me feel physically ill when I accidentally see something. Story 19. There is a Netflix series named Don't FK with Cats, Hunting an Internet Killer. Are you talking about the same person? I saw that series a long time ago, and it did show how people tracked him and informed the police. Story 20. Like 99% of PI business is either insurance fraud or checking on cheating spouses. Most are pretty mundane. It's telling that of the few stories here, it's basically shoot got real, so we gave it to the police. The interesting stuff is usually far too complex for a PI, rightfully so. Story 21. Actual PI here, but the only case that comes to mind was a woman who hired us because she thought her husband was cheating. He was going out at night, being cagey about where he was going, just generally acting weird. Turns out he was just going to a hookah bar and hanging out there for hours, then going home. No women, just himself. I guess he just needed some me time. Story 22. I don't know what happened after that, but I would guess that obtaining an unknown baby without a legal process, pretending to be its biological mother, and attempting to get money out of a guy knowing full well he's not the father is the sort of thing that triggers CPS to get involved in a not good way and remove the baby. Story 23. This is a good question. While the mother isn't required for paternity testing, having the mother available strengthens the statistical confidence of the child-father test. Confirming the maternity of the baby is also a legal measure to make sure the correct child is being tested, and many family courts will order the mother to submit a sample as a routine measure. Story 24. Lydia Fairchild gave birth to children that did not seem to be biologically hers. Investigation revealed that her reproductive cells had a different genotype than her blood and tissue cells. Chimerism. Story 25. I genuinely believe he was on the up and up. Eccentric, but not trying to scam. Being a face-painting clown was within his restrictions, LOL. There are people, though, a minority of claims, who go before administrative law judges and swear I am permanently and totally disabled, and then have to sit there while the court watches an hour-long video of them winning the 15th annual 500 lb Wheel of Cheese hurling competition that took place just last week. Makes things real awkward real fast. Story 26. I 100 knew it would be this or similar when I clicked the thread. It's far more common than I generally like to admit outside of talk with coworkers. I just got home from a 12-hour night shift where the first case of the day was a mother making adult content with her 3-month-old infant in the bed next to her in the videos. This is my cue to take the good meds and succumb to a pleasantly dreamless sleep for the next 6 hours. Story 27. There was passing penalty for such crimes in USSR, and one of the arguments to abolish it was that it had provoked criminals to eliminate victims to cover up crime. So while deciding what penalty are appropriate, you need to take into consideration how it can affect victims. Story 28. It's my current understanding that there is nothing that shows passing penalty as an effective deterrent, meaning there really should not be a passing penalty for this kind of thing, even without getting into the logistical nightmare of mistakes and the cost to attempt to prevent them. Story 29. Idaho just passed a law that allows for the passing penalty if convicted of CSA on a child under 12. We also just passed a law allowing for passing row inmates to be eliminated by a shooting squad to Seoul. Answer: the firing squad is fine. Passing is pretty much instantaneous because at least one of the hits is going to be right in the sniper's triangle, ensuring instant passing. It's far more humane than what lethal injection has become. The passing penalty for CSA under 12 sounds fine in theory, except youngsters aren't always the most reliable narrators and can be led more readily by adults they trust, who may be predetermined to suspect someone. You could only for certain know if they were caught in the act. Even if it was only one person falsely convicted and executed, you cannot make him undead. Story 30. I was wondering how true the story was also. I assumed op meant he was convicted for some other felony. Supplying minors with adult beverage is usually a misdemeanor unless someone dies. And you are correct, registration doesn't occur without a conviction or admission of guilt. Story 31. I can't understand this. I'm sorry. Do you mean call only the police and no one else? Or is this like don't get involved unless you're sure? I can't understand it. And the comment replying to you confuses me even more. I'm being genuine. I don't understand. Story 32. Yes, our job was to audit and find grounds to get the police involved. But once he lit the place on fire, they were interested regardless. And once he fled the country, the FBI was. He was caught rather quickly. He fled to Canada where he had relatives and stayed with them. Dumbass. Canadian police extradited him back to the US within a week. Story 33. Seriously, I remember watching this documentary called Dominion. A team goes undercover in Australia to uncover animal abuse happening in their country. It was deeply unsettling to see what some humans were comfortable in doing. Story 34. I dislike it all, but someone has to do it. It can be really tough, and I can feel the weight of it on me sometimes. But at the same time, I'm happy I can find the people who are doing terrible things and bring closure to people who are missing loved ones for whatever reason. I've seen news of people I've helped look for being found alive on here, and it always makes me very happy to see. Story 35. Same. After I had learned that someone I'm no longer friends with would slam their cat against the wall whenever he was mad, it devastated me. Nearly a year later, and whenever I think about it at all, I have to pick up my own kitty and cry on her. I don't know how you could do that to such a tiny, innocent creature.